So Brian and Gillian, thank you for joining me today. Can we have a hand of a round of applause for this paper? Right. So I think it might be appropriate for the two of you to begin with a poem, ideally a walking poem, if at all possible. Gillian, do you want to start?
Sure, and can I just explain that why we have the title that we do for this session? Is that the right time to do that? It's called Just Walking the Dogs, and it's it works into what we're going to talk about because of the inconvenient times that inspiration comes, really. But what really happened was that the director of the festival, I was sending in briefs about different panel information, and he said, "What are you going to call?" He sent me a message. "What are you going to call the panel?" And I just wrote back, "Just Walking the Dogs. I'll be back soon." And when I got the proof for the program that night, that's what was in the session. And I went, "Oh, that's not what I meant." He said, "Let's leave it. It's okay." So this poem is called Shoeless in Cook's Hill, and I have a little epigraph at the start, which is from the poet and Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh. And he had this beautiful saying that, among many, which was, "Walk as though with every step you are kissing the earth with your feet." Shoeless in Cook's Hill. Twilight slips under shadow, shedding spent wishes, calling dreams to gather and hold vigil to the light. Day has ended. Fruit-laden treetops wait heavily for harvest, sweet flesh stripped from palm nuts, figs chewed up, spat out, feasting bats chatter and chortle in rich, deep indulgence of night. Ground sticky underfoot, earth is cool, moist, exhales as it speaks of all the feet that have trodden over her and of the only feet that have kissed her, the soft-skinned feet and bare souls of children. Thank you.
Yep, it's working. This is a poem called Westerly at Bomble Beach. Dragging rags of clouds from inland squalls, lifting glassy barrels from the sea to the brow of the beach, constant pounding, gouging and plastering, feasting and purgation. A sudden waterspout, then nothing, a star's exhausted light. Beneath my toes, bubbler crabs settle into silken wet sand, slowing the turn's escape, goannas loping to fringing scrub, and up the saplings hiding in bark and leaves, eyes glowering, leaving their feast of broken things. My shadow disturbs small lizards bronzed by a dying winter's warmth. A sea eagle lifting from a broken sign, desolation and illusion. And she, so far away, no longer listening to the still breaking words. I reach up to grasp the torn dishcloth of clouds. Nature's dictionary opens. I clasp a haiku. The sand-laced wind keeps shifting, scrawling, "You will never win." One day I would like to voyage to somewhere life does not disappear before me. If I could reach the furthest corners of this beach and dark horizon, roll up the tableau, put it in my pocket, I would have you somewhere where one day I might find you, in some forgotten corner, arched back, curious, an animal on all fours, examining a shell, worlds within worlds, an end to no end, beginning without beginning, the westerly blowing.
So I think you can hear in both of those poems, which were indeed walking poems, thank you for choosing so well, the poems themselves clearly are situated in a particular place, in a particular time, and very much centered in what feels like an active space of walking. So maybe I can get you, Brian, to talk about that. Do you find that many of your poems begin with that, with a kind of a motion?
Yeah, I think so. But I was just talking to Gillian that was reading some of her work and that particular poem as well. That her ones have a marvellous presence, I think, and that, you know, whereas for me, I just kind of thought about this one and another one. I start off in the place, but then I end up somewhere else, you know, or I'm thinking about someone who I love and who isn't there, and I just wonder why that is, you know. But it's probably just the process of writing that I do, you know, which is like starting from a rhythm or a phrase and then kind of going on a journey which takes me away from where I actually am physically. So, and but I think, you know, it's fantastic to be able to be in a place and have that presence, and maybe that I think, isn't it more Chinese or that kind of they're present more, aren't they, as painters and you know, Chinese and Japanese. But it feels like you're present there, whereas me, maybe because I was brought up Catholic or something, and I use the physical thing and then go off into a kind of spiritual somewhere else. I don't know. What do you think?
I think the interesting thing about poetry, and one of the things that poetry does, is it creates meaning, not only semantical meaning, but meaning through rhythm and structure. And walking itself is a kind of, it provides a certain rhythm and structure, and I find with both your work, when I'm reading a poem that is situated in a walk, if you like, and I'm sticking to the theme of the session, that walk itself, the rhythm of the feet on the ground, and the rhythm of the observations and the pauses, almost creates the structure. Is that the case for you?
Yes. I do. I'm often surprised that I have done that. It's not as though I set out to have that motion be present in the work, or and the presence of things happening while you're busy doing something else is really what's underneath many of the pieces. And so many of us are too busy to sit down and write, or might not have that little notepad in our back pocket when something comes to mind. But the rhythm of walking, for me, it's also such a metaphor because it makes you move through the things that you're processing, if you like, I find. There's so many things going on in our head at any given time, and then if you take a millisecond to notice all of the other things that are happening around us at the same time, I think there's quite an enormous and vast space to draw from when you're creating some poems. And I find that the rhythm of walking and moving, it helps things become unstuck. So that's one of the things I find useful about movement, and learning to expect it to happen when I'm going to be busy is becoming a useful thing.
Yeah, that's critical, and you know, this notion of the poem not necessarily happening in a perfect place. I mean, again, it's one of the things that draws me to poetry is, you know, that I find other people are quite different, but I find I can't write prose without really having space, time to expand on a storyline. I really find it's difficult, whereas poetry seems to be able to slip into those cracks and happen anywhere, anytime, you know, in those spaces.
I think that's some of the, probably why I've stuck at it, gone away from it, come back. I've wrote a novel that's not published or anything, but I always come back to poetry, and I think it's that sense of magic, you know, that it can happen at any time, and you can be just kind of daydreaming and thinking of something that's maybe wonderful, and you think, oh, I'm a poet, I can write this down, you know, and it will be there, you know, it will be physical, you know, a thing that you can transfer to lots of people, and I think that's the part of the magic, you know, that I really think about.
So, you know, we've talked about this whole notion of just walking the dogs, right? And it's interesting because, again, a lot of your work is situated in that space of, you know, kind of being out walking. But at what point would you say that you know, you're out walking, or you're, you know, in the dentist chair, or you're looking after the kids, or whatever it is, that space that your kind of mind is going, poetry images, you know, this thing. At what point does it actually stop being a dog walk and become a poem?
Yeah. maybe I think I probably used to, when I was younger, I'd say, oh yeah, just yeah, right when you're walking along, you know. Like, but I think I kind of, you know, the famous thing that Wordsworth said, which was emotion recollected in tranquility. I think that is a big thing, you know, like you're there and you kind of, you're feeling all these things, and you try and train yourself to remember these emotions, but also, you know, it is changed by time and being removed from that situation, and all these other things come into it when you finally do write it down, I find, and then when you go back to it, there's more things that come back, and you know, so I guess that's the editing process. When does it work, you know, and you can only do that by trying it.
I think there certainly is a point where it shifts over to be something that can live on the page. I think with the process of being distracted while you're busy doing something or walking and inviting yourself to stay in a space where other things can drop in. Again, that thing that happens where we tend to bring back to the present, there is so much going on around us that informs the way, for me as a writer, the way that I'm experiencing any given distraction, and the physical things around me and sensual things like scent and texture and weather and light and time of day, and then the internal body experience of whether we are feeling alert or sharp or tired or overwhelmed. All those kinds of things for me are the things that make the shift, because they almost need to be put outside of me so that they are in a more ordered relationship with what's going on. I'm not sure if that makes much sense, but it's certainly the point if I'm distracted by an idea or there's an experience I just want to work on and get over it. That's a really good pivot for getting things into words and on a page where you can go back and fix them up later or decide whether or not it's worth working on at all.
It seems there's almost an element too in the actual beginnings, in that fuzzy beginning of mindfulness, of actually taking notice. I mean, I did find, going back to Kit Keelan, who's been around today, he had this website. It was, what was it called again? He did a poem a day.
Oh,
yeah. And Poetry 365, +1, right, yes, it was a blog. And it kept going for quite a while, and you know, I participated in it just for 1 month. That's what I felt I could do a poem a day for, without it impacting on everything. But it was very interesting. I found the fact that I knew I had to do a poem, every single day meant that I was looking at things in a different way. I was actually going out going, what am I going to find to make a poem? Do you find that you ever set out on your perambulations to actually come back with a poem or start looking at things in a different way once you've shifted into poetry mind?
It's interesting. So I was in a band for many years, and like basically I was the writer, and every time we practiced, basically they just expected me to come up with lyrics. So I got to the point where they'd be playing something, and I just immersed myself into that, the music and rhythms, and just kind of write like that. And when I was younger, I could do that easily in some ways, and write, you know, quite good songs, I thought, for you know, quite quickly. But that kind of, after a while, you get more self-critical, and I guess writing lyrics you can get away with a lot more than writing poetry. And so, yeah. Now I think, well, the age I am now, I have preoccupations, but I find that a certain landscape can bring out certain things that I'm preoccupied with. But I still think it's interesting that I'm going somewhere away from where I am actually. Whereas you're really embracing that that place and the people in it, the children especially, in the ones I was reading today. And I think that's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Thank you.
So immersing yourself in the moment.
Yeah.
Something to do quite well.
It's funny too, because there's always that paradox that by the time I've written it, that's history already. It's already been and gone, so it's no longer the authentic, instantaneous moment that I'm trying to share. I think as writers, I think a lot of writers that we read, we tend to write when those of us who don't have the discipline, we tend to write when we feel the push from inside of ourselves to get something on the page. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be disciplined about it have a more organised way, I think, and plan of putting yourself in a place where some of the work can come and it has the space to happen at your desk in your study with some time that the family knows not to come and yell at you. However, one of the things that when you mentioned the blog that Kit Kellen used to run, one of the interesting things about it was, and I'd encourage anyone to try it for a while, even if you only challenge yourself to write something every other day. It's like when you exercise with gymnastics, the more you exercise that muscle, the easier it is to get it to work. And I found myself writing a new kind of poetry, and I found myself practicing and imitating and playing with words in a way that I hadn't done when I had that sense of, okay, it's the only time I've been able to get to the page for the last week and a half, so I better make it good. Whereas the sort of discipline of just, all right, I've made a commitment, someone else is waiting to see it, I'll get something out there. And that was the thing too, there were no rules, it didn't have to be great, it had to be draft. So it's a really healthy exercise to just give yourself permission to write the chaff. That's what so I'm not sure if that stayed with the thread of your question.
No, that's fine. And I want to just go back to this, what you just said a minute ago, which was really interesting to me, this idea that the moment's already passed when you're actually working on the poem. So although the poems are situated in a time and a place, obviously you can't write while you're walking, otherwise you bump into things. Maybe sometimes poets do that, but nevertheless, I feel one of the things I really enjoy with your work, Gillian, is that you do have a tendency to play as well with that, almost call it a nostalgia for what's not there, for who's not there, for what can't be, for the moment that is past. So that, and again, I think all good poetry has tensions in it between things that are often disparate. And that's one thing that really strikes me as a good tension in your work, is that tension between kind of biography and memory, if you like. Can I get you to just talk briefly about that?
About biography and memory?
In your work, yeah, and how you play with those concepts.
Okay.
As in the moment is past.
Yeah. I have always felt like what I write isn't exclusively my own. It's almost a sense, it's not a sense of duty, but I have this probably arrogant assumption that some of the things that I write will be quite familiar to people, and that I have this wish that when I write, it's an offering for you to, as a reader or a listener in a space, to connect to it and own it, if you like, or find the words or the phrases or the histories that I bring up as something that some of us or all of us have shared in some way. So that sort of biography, I think I try to connect with the shared commonality of other people. I don't feel very satisfied if some of the work that we do can be a little exclusive to our own subjective experience, and in some ways that can be a little bit separating. And the gift of reading poetry from other poets who engage me and move me and take me out of there's no time when I'm reading poems. So if I can, it's interesting that I'm now saying there's no time when you're in the space of a poem. So that's kind of the stuff that happens. For me, it's a very magical but it's almost a given, you know. If poetry is doing its work, you're right in there, in the story, in the economy of poetry too. It can be achieved in a very sharp, fast way. I think having the opportunity to recognise that things that have already happened, they're not necessarily spent. They still have value. it's valuable to use those experiences to bring back a shift, or just to invite people to enjoy the art that can be created through not having to like we all get told to get over it and get on with it. But I think sometimes in poetry there's a good space for us to be able to linger a little while longer and maybe look a little bit harder at the gifts that the moments have had, whether they've been comfortable or not.
Yes, we'll have another session at another festival on quantum physics and poetry, and why poetry and time are in some ways related.
Can I just, I was just wondering, biography and being present, and I just want to read this short poem because I think it's useful to think about. So this one was written when I was in Bellingen, in North Bellingen. It was a 50-year flood. The bridge was down after the first day, and power went out. 4 days without power or be able to get out of the house. So after a while, I was starting to go crazy. And anyway, this poem is called "Searching for a Cigarette in the Blackout After a Flood." Bellingen, February 2013. I find it hard to remember what it was like, drawing it in, filling my lungs with its airy cream, to gild the solemn moment with a wreath of desire, a sharp line ascending in an Art Deco curl. As the river inches up the hill, I yearn for this definition blurred, the heart's twinge beside the candle flame. I see my wife by her mother's side, the shattered lungs, the denial that body's ache for one last breath. I wanted some kind of breath to fill the lungs or heart, desire for what we cannot have, and you always at the corner of my eye. And turning, I am back in this small room, watching the candle flame. The power is gone, the river inches up the hill. So that was, you'd think when you're in a flood, trapped in the flood, you'd be writing poetry a lot, but basically that was the only thing I wrote, like in those 4 days. And I thought, why did I not take the opportunity? But it was more like, it was just very intense, and it brought back, like my mother-in-law's death, and my marriage being broken down, and I think it was being set in that trapped area with the water kind of climbing up the hill, that seemed to kind of resonate more and more, so it just kind of came out that way, But anyway.
So let's talk about, and I didn't prepare you at all for this, but let's talk about writing in grief, because I think it's really it's relevant to what you've just read. It's also really relevant to Gillian's work, and I think in some ways it's relevant to the notion of how we'll be out walking the dog, or dealing with death, or dealing with whatever it is we deal with in our day-to-day life, and then how the poet will take that experience, transcend the time, bring the moment back, and turn it into something that is different in many ways. Different, not different. Different and not different, because the pain may still be there, but it becomes something almost shared and universal, and the poison is gone. The power is there, but the poison is gone, and it allows us to capture something that is ineffable. So do you want to just talk about that a little, Gillian? Because I know grief and pain sort of suffuses your work, and you always, and yours too, Brian, you always have that transformative element when you play with that. And maybe feel free to read another poem if you want.
Just wondering which one I should read. Some of you were just at the book launch, the one I would have read you've just heard.
Do it again.
Yeah, do it again, I wasn't there.
I think, look, grief's such a universal experience, but it's different for every single one of us. So again, there's this kind of paradox that maybe we can visit through our art, through our creativity, that gives it permission to be whatever version it is. And I hear myself continually returning to suggesting that there are certainly worthwhile outcomes and gifts in taking the risk of writing things down. I just think that's a really useful thing if you take nothing else away, to just give yourself, if writers don't call themselves writers, it doesn't matter, do it anyway. In terms of grief, it's such an unpredictable creature, and to be able to return to the love that is underneath grief and loss, and that a newer space that's created by something no longer being there in its physicality, that love can buoy us and certainly help us transform into, I mean, that's such a jerky word, but help us shift on through and to be able to take the next step and enjoy the day. I will read too, if that's all right. Can you hold this while I find it? Sure, absolutely.
And also connect us. But I want to use that word connect, because I do feel like when you experience a great grief, it kind of isolates you. And working through that grief in art, in many ways, it's like there's a kind of, mycelium, from mushroom metaphor, a sort of connecting thread that all of us share through that grief, that becomes something almost beautiful in its connection. And that's the nexus of art, I think, the point at which it becomes art. Have I successfully stalled you?
Yes, successfully stalled. So this first one, if you're at the launch, you would have heard me read this. It's called Sleepover, and it's for a girlfriend of mine that I knew since I was 4, and her brother and I grew up together, and I was in her room with her for the last few weeks of her life, and a couple of people in the room knew her from 40 odd years ago along with me. So this is about the 3 of us and being in the room where she was going to die, and her brother and I managed to stay there overnight one night with her. This is called Sleepover. The Barbies and the soldiers on night duty, your mum laying out the toothbrushes, we'd chorus and frothy giggle. We, pyjama-clad, slept all in, tucked up and storied. On sleeping bag nights, the bottom half stayed empty, legs too short to fill. I used to think the model airplanes hanging from the ceiling were the coolest thing ever. Like the way your bed moves up and down, like the colours the flowers bring to this grey room, and us 3 all in hospital blankets, tucked up in bed, on couches, talking at 4 a.m, when nurses break the quiet of sleep to do their checks. The indicators of dying need measuring, the measures of grief need interrupting. The dawn is storied now, and stirs with our giggles. This sleepover is breathtaking. Who'd have ever thought we'd get to do this again, all craggy and almost 50, we 3 here, together for all the wrong reasons, and tonight your deathbed is joyous. And it was like that, we had sleepovers from when we were tiny, and we were sitting there laughing, going, my God, we're all just about 50 years old, we're having a sleepover, and we're all awkward on the cushions, and then the nurse would bustle in and poke her and prod her, and we'd all be rolling our eyes, and it was just so fantastic. And that irony just really struck me of how in love I was with those 2 people, and how devastated I was that we were about to see her literally die before our eyes. And it was just the most fantastic thing.
So how wonderful to be able to, what a gift it is as a poet, to be able to not just experience that, but to capture and share that moment of transformation.
Yeah. And you and I shared the award last year in the Grieved Writing Award. And I just wanted to finish, because you give another poem. It's called Certain Kind, and I think one of you was just referring to the quiet and sort of coming back to a space. And you'll know when I read it, it'll make sense to what Maggie said a minute ago, but I can't remember what it was. It's called Certain Kind. There's a certain kind of kindness that has the day begin again. It sits quietly in the room waiting for tired shoulders under crumpled shirt. It's almost a brand, the way it gives a room a certain edge. It just steps in softly to rest beside secrets like anxiety and ill-fitting shoes. It's that undefinable rallying that makes the next step able. One foot in front of the other, bit by bit. Sitting becomes gentle, less slumping. The couch is ready, the kindness there, waiting, alongside and holding.
So I'm going to ask a few more questions, but I just wanted to let you and the audience know that in about 10 minutes or so, I will be opening the floor. So you'll be able to ask questions. So start thinking about what you want to ask, because I'd like to have lots of time for interaction.
Can I just ask, I was just kind of thinking when I was listening to the poems and thinking about it, I just kind of wonder, you know, I think I'm an obsessive person, I think, and do poets have to be obsessive? Because I think that must aid, it has to aid the process of distilling a moment or a feeling into something. Because I think, yeah, you know, I just had that kind of thought. Do you think that's true? Do you think poets are obsessive?
I reckon.
Or is it going, you know?
Maybe a bit of both, but I reckon we're a little bit guilty of getting fixated on detail. But that's where we find the gems that we can kind of spin off to you know, create a thread around an idea and a notion that's had difficulty coming to the page.
Yeah, I just kind of think I have, you know, problems or whatever, and I just keep on going round and round, you know, and then I come out in the poems or whatever, and they keep on going. So I just got to think, yeah, maybe I'm probably a bit mentally ill and all that, but, you know.
There's a spectrum, I'm sure. So both of you, another thing that distinguishes both of you that you both also have is that you're performance poets. You do a lot of performance you're known for your performance. And I really wanted to discuss, there are lots of things we can discuss, but I really am interested in the relationship between performing your work, the work that sits on the page, and the audience, who are very much part of every performance. So, Brian, do you want to just start by talking about performance?
Well, yeah, I guess the thing is, I was thinking about this because my band, or we went overseas and we played there, so we're big in Italy, but not really in Australia, kind of cult band in Australia. But the thing is that I think I accepted when I was in the band that I'd have to dig deep and become a public persona as well, and my private thoughts for the songs to be real and connecting I'd have to really open myself. So I think that's the thing that you, as a poet as well, you know, like you can never come out, you can just publish poetry and never, you know, you're not a public person. But if you are a performance poet or a singer on the stage, you're there, you know, like there's no hiding. And like for the song that we're probably most known for is a song called Father's Suit, and this was done because my father died when I was about 22, and before the funeral I opened up my wardrobe, and my mother had put all my father's suits in my wardrobe. So and like I was, you know, and so basically that became a song, but it was more a celebration in the end, because it was like screaming and dancing in my father's suit. So it's just like, I'm going to take it on. It's kind of like black humor as well, but in fact it became a kind of energetic celebration kind of thing. So I mean that's how my work kind of sometimes works. But sorry, I should have. Your question was really about about performance. I think, yeah, you just got to open yourself up. I mean, you just have to be able to be a person who is really okay with opening up their most fragile weaknesses and things that can be, if people wanted to, they could wound you with them. That happened to me a few times, but you just, it's part of the joy of doing this, I think, in some ways. I don't know. How does it work for you, Gillian?
So, to speak to your question around how you find yourself performing poetry, I think I've been really lucky because one of the local schools sometimes invites me to do poetry workshops with kids, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do sessions with kids from year 4 right up to year 10 at any given moment. But what I often find myself talking to about them is there's an old gypsy story, or is it a northern European folk story with one of the Baba Yaga stories, the old witch. And one of the things that Baba Yaga used to do was come down from the mountain and collect random bones that she found from bits of skeletons from creatures all over the land, and she would take them back to her cave, and she'd continue this process, and she'd lay them out on the ground and assemble them until she had a complete skeleton. They weren't necessarily from the same creatures, these bones, which I think is really powerful in a poem all in by itself. But what she would do then, once she got back to the cave and had this amazing thing in front of her, was she would sing over the bones, and as she would sing over the bones, it would become a being again, and she called it singing up the flesh. And at a very young age, I had read that, and I found, end of high school or something, and I remember thinking, that's what happens when I read to a room. I notice that I'm giving the poem on the page, I'm singing up the flesh, I'm giving the bones some voice and some substance that is there waiting to be met by the listener. So I find that a really amazing and wonderful privilege to be able to read to a room, because one of the things I also enjoy doing is listening to the room. I find myself being impatient with poets who think that you all have to sit there and listen to us. I think one of our jobs as poets who read out loud is to listen to the room and read the room and try to re-engage you if we lose any of you, which I found myself doing at the launch. We'd sat through 2 hours of poetry, and thank goodness you all sat through it and got to the end. Thank you for that. But I do think it's a really healthy thing if you find that you're in a room with poets who have got that sort of commitment. Like, I don't want to lose you. I'm not reading just so I get to read. I'm reading so that you come on a trip with me. And one of the other things about it is that when you do read out loud, you're getting inside the poem. You're helping to step inside it and dwell within it. And then the nuances that may not be in the black and white print have an opportunity to come through. Some poets are the most fantastic readers, but somehow when they read out loud, it doesn't always cut the mustard. And I feel very guilty saying that, but I think it's probably true. And it's just quite a great thing to get inside it. And also, if you're borrowing someone else's story or writing someone else's biography, and you need to, if you read stuff out loud, it changes. You can see where the mistakes are. You can see more of your poem when it's outside of your mouth and in front of you. And when you're getting into someone else's story and someone else's biography, it gives you a chance to get inside it and live into it a little bit more. And hopefully the result will be that your work is better. But I've always approached reading at the microphone with two things, big dilemma, which I reckon leads into maybe something else we could talk about. But there's that sense of, if I'm not going to do it well and I'm not going to jag you, then why bother reading it out loud at all? I want you to love it and hang on every word if my poem is doing its work. And I love nothing more. I'm blown away when I sit in an audience and I hear other readers. I'm so blessed and stoked about that. But then there's that dilemma of being called a performance poet. I don't call myself a performance poet. I do not own that tag comfortably. And yet it consistently stays with me. And it's that sort of tricky thing because, I spoke to a very famous poet once who we were messaging. There was an event on, and I said, "Oh, you're going to come to the big event?" And it was around performance poetry. And his reply was, "No, the pages don't mix with the stages." And I felt really separated. You know, I felt judged and I felt labelled, and I thought I've always dwelt in both places. I don't know why I have to go over there and stay there. And then there's that dilemma, like, if I'm not going to do it well, why do it at all? So I'm going to give you the best thing I can when I do it out loud. And yet, if someone's going to go, well, you're not really a poet with any traction because you're a performance poet, and I kind of think, well, what do I do with that?
I actually wonder whether or not being in the band for a decade, you know, meant that people kind of, like, you know, sometimes you think, oh, you're not really serious, you know, as a poet because you've been in the band, you know, like, and yeah, I can really empathise with that. You know, I think the thing is, you are who you are, you know, and sometimes you write a poem that's good to read out, others not. Yeah. Can I just ask, what about because we were talking about the space, the personal, when the personal can become public, you know, and the things around it. So there was one thing where, just very quickly, I was going to say, there was, so I entered the Poetry to More competition in WA, and because I was writing quite a fair few love poems, and I was looking through the love poems that I had, and one time there was it was this time where my girlfriend was saying, oh, I've got to go, you know, I can't hang around you for a while, you know. So I just wrote this, I just wrote a letter to her, and because I was a poet, I wrote it as a poem, you know, but not really a poem. And it was just called Stay With Me. And so I just kind of wrote it straight out, sent it to her. I don't know what, I couldn't quite get what she thought of it, but anyway, she came back to me anyway for a while. But when I was putting together the poems to send to the competition, I kind of looked at that somehow and thought, actually, this is kind of works as a poem, you know. Like I know it's just a letter, and then I said to her, do you mind if I send this in as a potential thing? And anyway, it got a commended award, you know. And I went there and read it out loud, and just very quite emotionally, because it was, you know, like it wasn't really a poem, you know. And then someone wrote back and said, who was a poet, said, this is the way, you know, these are the kind of poems that I want, you know, I want this kind of emotion, I want something to mean something, and that kind of performance reached her, and she said, you know, I cried at the thing, and I cried when I read it, and I thought, that's the best thing I've ever had. Anyway, so I entered it again last year and came second, so which was great, and I wasn't going to go to Western Australia again, so I wrote back to the pod and said, look, could you actually read it out for me? And she did, and she said it was just magical, you know. I didn't see it, you know, but she said it was just like, yeah, it was great. And anyway, so I'll shut up now, sorry. But I think that's the thing, you know, like you don't know whether, you know, there are some people that are only performance poets, I guess, you know. But you and me, I think we're not like that, you know. We're not.
Well, it is almost as if, too, the point at which you're performing a poem is a thing, and the poem on the page is another thing.
Yeah.
And you create like different works of art, effectively, and they operate in different spheres, and they can cross over. So we have. Sorry, I've just been given a little. Yes.
I know we're getting a wind up. I just wanted to add to that idea that, you know, when you read to the room, how many of you are here? 20 odd people. So there's been, every time we've read you one poem, there's been 20 other poems happen in the room, because you've all had your own listening. That's the gift in having it read out loud. It's one of the things that's quite remarkable.
Yes, very nice. And on that note, we have about 10 minutes left, so I would love for you to join us and ask some questions. Anything you want, really. We've got one over there.
Gillian, hi. David Gunson from Poetry Department. You struck on a really interesting topic here about the difference, I'll use inverted commas for it, the difference between performance poetry and poetry on the page. I once wrote that as soon as you choose a path towards a goal, you've limited the options towards arriving at the correct place. When you do performance poetry, it's your interpretation of the words being delivered directly to the hearer. And that can be an overwhelming influence on their response to it because of the emotional content you put in your voice, the cadence, the way you do your phrasing, your physical appearance in public. When a poem is put onto a page, my view is you've just created a meme. And that meme is now free to enter any mind and mutate in any one of a million different ways. And that is the miracle of poetry, because it's distilled language. My question is, what do you think of that idea?
I agree. I mean, I totally agree with you about setting yourself on a voyage and saying you're going to do it that way, limiting. That's for sure. I think that's the secret of poetry is the actual voyage to it and how that ends up. I think. Look, I think any way that poetry can get out there, if performance poetry can bring people to read poetry on the page, you know, hopefully it's like the festival that I ran for a while. The Slam was by far the most successful event, popular, so like 450 people crowding into it, and huge, you know. It can become, I think it can become a bit, if it is a particular way, it can become a bit pop music-y, like, and the way, yeah, I don't know, yeah, it's, I don't want to put a limit on it, no, I don't want to describe it, but it can become, yeah, I like the page, as you say, I like reading the page, but it's great to listen to Julian read those and yeah, just experience that, yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry, did you want to ask a question? You're not just timekeeping for me.
No, I'm not calling time. I'm saying I want to ask a question. I want to throw right back to the beginning where we started, walking the dog, and I wonder, you know, do you come up with suddenly a set of words that you don't know how you're going to use sometime, but you have them and they kind of pop in your head and something's triggered? And I mean, do you write those kinds of things down? Do you just start off sometimes just assembling little brain bursts without actually having a destination in mind that you might then come over back to and chew and maybe weave and thread and polish?
Yes.
Yes, for me too.
I think when I'm teaching kids or sitting with my daughter and putting her through a grueling process of working stuff with her poetry to, you know, I call it the bank. We always have a bank, and there's a bank of words that feel good to say, or that taste good, or that, you know, taste good and have a great texture when you hear them. And there's a bank of words that look really cool on the page when they're together. So the bank is something we go back to. Or it could be a treasure chest, or it could be whatever name you want to give it. But I've decided that it's a really handy thing to have a little bank of ideas. And in my phone now, I've got this random series of odd stuff. But often I'll pull that out when I'm editing bits. When I did the manuscript for this, and I, you know, was sent away with my tail between my legs to fix up a whole lot of stuff. And it was such an amazing process. But I thought, oh, I'll get the bank out and I'll see what I can do. And it was really helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got, I guess, notebooks, you know, like that sometimes you can look back and something that you wrote down casually can leap out at you. Actually, one time, I remember one time there was this, so I got together with my girlfriend and it was pretty kind of like special, and like the day she left and I was left alone, and I kind of like, I was completely in turmoil, and I wrote down, I just kind of wrote down something, you know, like, and I went back to bed because I was exhausted for various reasons. And when I got back, I realised that I just kind of jotted down stuff. It wasn't actually a poem, you know, like it was like I didn't even realise that I'd written it. You know, it's just like something like that can happen. You know, it's just really, really weird. You know, that magic can happen whenever. You know, it's just and it can be something that from the past that you look at again 5 years later even and you realise what it actually meant. You know, and then you can go from there. You can construct from there as well.
Yeah, I often walk around with a problem, sort of, you know, in my head, a problem I can't resolve, and that problem can become the impetus for the poem. But we have a question here.
I'm just struck by listening to you and the man after that about how physical and how corporeal you're making all of your language really. It just reminds me of purpose and etc. And it just reminds me of what I love most about poetry, and it's that care with words, you know, it's that getting to the essence and bringing out the essence and making them mean as much as they possibly can. And part of that is about doing what you've all been talking about you know, about having a baker breast, drilling the texture and working with it and polishing it and all of that sort of thing, because it brings into play, you know, the mind-body connection. It's that thing of giving substance to something, really. And I think poetry is the most powerful of the arts. It gives you all that metaphor and imagery that makes it as real and as tangible as it possibly can be. And that, I think, is the healing capacity and why it's so crucial.
Also, because it doesn't have to necessarily mean one thing. It can mean many, many things. And I go back to the, you know, very interesting way of looking at it that you presented about the, you know, page being a meme and the, you know, or performance giving a slant. And that is, poetry can allow for these multiplicity of meanings all at once. You know, it can be joy, it can be pain, it can be here, a person can be here and they can be not here. You know, it can be like Schrodinger's cat, you know, you can be alive and dead at the same time. And all of that multiplicity in a poem, it doesn't necessarily have to mean something specific or particular. It can also mean in non-semantical ways. It can mean through rhythm and through other kinds of expressions. So I agree with you. It's well stated. One more question. Sherry?
Okay, last question. I'll try to make it a simple question. I was struck by when you spoke about how when you're walking the dog, does it cross over to stop being walking the dog and being a poem. And my question is, how would you approach the word radical embodied openness when you set the intention? As you said, when you were writing every day, you kept things, I'm going to write something every day. So you've already got that into the subconscious. Do you then find a difference in that there isn't any boundary, there isn't any one particular point? Or when you're walking the dog and you've already got that embodied radical openness, where is it in each of your practices and you feel, okay, I'm fully present and just something has just crossed my path and that tingling and that sense, like, I'm going to tuck that away, but I'm already here. The poem has already begun, I just have to be ready to touch it. So the question is, embodiment and openness, and is it really, at that point, is it really necessary even to care as to be a page poem, and like never a poem, it's something that gets written down in a journal.
That end part of what you said is really interesting. I think that's where I have to take myself, that it doesn't matter how it's received, that it is offered is the important part. And I think, speaking to a little bit of what Karen was talking about too, that moment of embodying the work, I think in my little viewpoints of the worlds that we're in, we're not necessarily very good at feeling a lot of the time, or we're sort of taught culturally to be stoic to a point and not let things get too emotional or too extreme, and you know, our landscape of emotions is often tapered. And I think that poetry, to embody a moment or to actually step into that visceral experience of someone else's story or your own, or a moment like you say, something that's already speaking to you, I think that is when the shift happens and it writes itself. Am I still answering your question? And I kind of kept thinking about what Karen was saying, because I think it's a good healthy way for people to practice experience rather than being tough and toughing it out, and buffering experience, buffering feeling. And I do think there's a value in stepping into experience, because then you can get back to the academic self and try to go join the belly with the cerebral and try to make it work a little differently.
Last thing? Last word?
It's, I am being open and radical and open to the, I think sometimes you have experiences that are so powerful, and you kind of feel that there will be a time when you can translate that into poetry. I could go into there was a time, so I'm really opening myself up here, but there was a time when my mother was on a deathbed, basically, and my girlfriend's son took it in his head to blame me for their marriage breakup, which wasn't true. But anyway, he decided to, while my mother was on the deathbed, to write to me and threaten to kill me. And in some ways, like, after that, I mean, it didn't happen, obviously. but it was so extreme that, in a way, it had to come out as poetry, because poetry, in some ways, has to come out. It's the perfect way of saying something that you can't say in any other way. It's the art form, I think, is that. If it can't be anything else. It's got to be a poem, you know. And that kind of came out, and I was able to write this poem, but I don't think I think I did read it out once, but I don't think I could read it out, you know, because it is, you know, so raw, and there's so much kind of, I don't think there's enough distance that I can put into it. It's more like this cry of pain, I suppose, you know, so that's the thing. I mean, yeah, so you can, that's a difference, you know. Can you make something, walking the dog or experiencing life that is resolved enough for other people to get something out of it, or is it just a cry of pain, you know? So I think, you know, Gillian's been able to do that, and sometimes I've been able to do it, so that's the main thing.
Okay, I have to end it here. They're gathering at the door. But thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and your great questions. And the bookstore has books, and hopefully see you again soon.